She worked there for 18 years, and they handed her a cardboard box. A father had $340 in his bank account and a daughter with leukemia, and the insurance company said no 11 times. And a woman wrote 847 drafts alone at 2 in the morning and watched someone else sit on national television and take credit for every single word. 3 stories tonight. 3 people who refused to accept what they were told. Stay until the end. I promise you, every single one of these pays off.
The Founder's Clause.
They put 18 years of her life in a cardboard box. Her stapler, her coffee mug, the photo of her mother at the plant's ribbon-cutting ceremony, and a handwritten card with a name she had never seen before, a lawyer in Kansas City. She almost threw it away. Almost.
My name is Carol Simmons. I'm 52 years old, and I spent 18 of those years inside Whitfield Industrial Supply, a mid-size manufacturing company in Kansas City that made precision components for the agricultural sector. I didn't walk in through the front door as an executive. I walked in at 34 as an operations assistant, with a high school diploma, 2 young daughters, and a recent divorce that had left my bank account with less than $400. Harold Whitfield hired me personally. He was 61, wore blue suspenders every single day of the week, and always arrived before any factory employee. He didn't ask where I went to school. He asked, "Can you learn fast and work when it's needed?" I said yes, and I meant it. In the first 5 years, I learned every inch of that operation, the suppliers' names, the shift schedules, the contracts with distributors in Kansas and Nebraska. I learned when the B-line jammed because of autumn humidity, and which mechanic could fix it in 20 minutes when it would take anyone else 3 hours. Harold promoted me 3 times in that period. Logistics manager, junior operations director, senior operations director, a title I created alongside him because it hadn't existed before me. My salary reached $72,000. For a woman without a college degree in Kansas City, at that time, that was a life built with your own hands. But what I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Harold had done something quiet in a law office 15 years before he died. Harold Whitfield died on a Monday in November, 2 years ago. Heart attack. He was 83 years old and still arrived at 7 in the morning. The funeral was on a Thursday. I stood beside the production line with the other 42 employees who came. Harold's 2 sons, Derek, 56, and Ryan, 52, the same age as me, stood at the front in black suits, shaking hands with the important clients. I had never had a real conversation with either of them. They showed up twice a year, looked at the reports I prepared, and went back to their lives in St. Louis and Scottsdale. Harold talked about them with that specific care fathers use when they're trying to say something without saying it. Derek is very busy. Ryan has his own vision of things. And then he'd change the subject. For 6 months after Harold died, the company ran because I made it run. Derek and Ryan appeared more, Zoom meetings, a few quick visits, but the operational decisions kept coming to me. In March, they hired a consulting firm from St. Louis called Apex Operations Group. 6 external consultants, all with MBAs. None of them had ever set foot in a components factory in their lives. I prepared their onboarding presentation, showed them every process, every supplier, every contract. I spent 3 weeks transferring 18 years of operational knowledge to 6 people who wrote everything down on new tablets and called me Carol, with that specific tone that means they don't see you as an equal. In April, Derek called me, not on my work extension, on my personal cell phone, at 4:30 in the afternoon. "Carol, we need to talk tomorrow morning." The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Derek and Ryan on one side of the conference table, me on the other, a white envelope in the center. Derek said the company was going through a strategic restructuring, that Apex Operations Group would be taking over operational management in an integrated way, that my position was being eliminated in the process. Ryan said nothing. He looked out the window for all 11 minutes. The envelope contained a check for 2 weeks' salary. $2,769. 18 years. $2,769. Derek said, "Security will accompany you to collect your belongings." I didn't cry in front of them. I decided that in the second I saw the envelope. I took the check, folded it, put it in my bag, and said, "Okay." 2 words. Because sometimes, when something hits you too deep to react, that's all you can say. The cardboard box sat in my garage for 23 days. It wasn't weakness. It was something different. That specific paralysis that happens when you know that opening something will make everything real at once. While the box stayed closed, I could still wake up in the morning and pretend, for a few seconds before remembering, that on Monday I'd walk through Whitfield's side door and boot up my computer and drink the coffee that Marcus from the Beeline always had ready when he arrived before everyone. My oldest daughter, Diane, showed up one Saturday with pizza and said, "Mom, the box." We opened it together. My wine-colored stapler. My mug that said, "But first coffee." The photo of my mother on the factory's opening day in 1987, years before I worked there. Harold had given me the photo one Christmas because he thought I should have it. A notepad. A phone charger. And at the bottom, alone, a white card. Handwritten. Harold's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. 18 years of looking at the notes he left on my desk. "Carol, if you're reading this, things didn't happen the way I wanted. Call Thomas Reeves. He knows what to do." And a phone number with area code 816, Kansas City. I called Thomas Reeves the following Monday at 9 in the morning. Cold hands, sitting at the kitchen table with the card in front of me. The receptionist said, "Reeves and Calloway, how can I help?" I said my name. There was a 2-second pause, the kind that tells you the person on the other end recognized the name. And then, "One moment, please." Thomas Reeves picked up in less than a minute. Calm voice, early 60s by the sound of it. He said, "Carol, I've been expecting your call. I'm glad you called. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2? I said yes before asking anything. That night I didn't sleep. I searched his name online. Thomas Reeves was a founding partner of a boutique corporate law firm in Kansas City. 32 years of practice, specialty in estate planning and corporate law. No scandals, no cases against him. The photo on the website showed a man with round glasses and the expression of someone who keeps secrets very carefully. Thomas Reeves's office was in a brick building in the Crossroads district. 2 flights of stairs. Small waiting room, smelling of old wood and fresh coffee. He received me standing. Firm handshake. We sat down. He placed a folder on the table, blue folder, thin with a handwritten label that said only, "Whitfield, Clause 14C. "Harold came to me 15 years ago," he said. 2 years after he hired you. He said you were the most important person the company had, and that he wanted to make sure that was recognized if things went the wrong way. He opened the folder. In Harold Whitfield's will, registered with this county in March 2011, there is a conditional clause. If you, Carol Ann Simmons, were terminated without documented cause before reaching 55 years of age, 18% of Whitfield Industrial Supply's common stock would transfer to you automatically from the date of termination. I heard the words. I heard every one of them. And then I heard the silence that came after. "You are 52 years old," Thomas said. "You were terminated 24 days ago. There is no documented cause in any document they've presented to me." He pushed the folder toward me. "You have been a shareholder of Whitfield Industrial Supply since the day Derek Whitfield said, 'Security will accompany you to collect your belongings.'" Thomas explained the process with the patience of someone who had been waiting for this phone call for a long time. The clause was legally airtight. Harold had used precise language and registered the document with 2 independent witnesses and notarized authentication. The sons had received copies of the complete will at probate 2 years ago. Clause 14C was there, on pages 31 and 32 of a 67-page document. They didn't read it? I asked. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Their attorney clearly didn't read carefully, or read it and didn't understand the implication. When you are terminated without cause, the clause activates automatically. It's not an option. It can't be contested on the merits, only on execution. And the execution here is flawless. What happens now? I notify their attorneys today. They have 10 business days to acknowledge the transfer. If they don't, we file a will enforcement action in county court. Harold was very specific. He wanted this to be non-refusable. I held the blue folder in my hands, paper. 15 years of quiet anticipation from a man who wore blue suspenders and arrived at 7 in the morning. Why did he do this? I asked. Not for Thomas, for myself, out loud. Thomas answered anyway. He said some people build things and other people just inherit, and that he wanted at least one person who had built something to receive what she deserved. The notification reached Derek and Ryan's attorneys on a Wednesday. Thomas called me Thursday at 8 in the morning. They called immediately. Derek is in a panic. Their attorney is a generalist from St. Louis who clearly isn't a will specialist. They'll try to contest. Do they have grounds? None that will survive a judge, Thomas said. But they'll try. Prepare for a few difficult weeks. And here's what Thomas hadn't told me yet, and what I learned 3 days later, with a satisfaction he clearly tried to hide. While all of this was unfolding legally, Whitfield Industrial Supply was quietly falling apart. Apex Operations Group had taken over completely in May. 6 consultants, $48,000 a month in fees. And in the 3 weeks since my termination, the Byline had stopped twice. A key supplier from Nebraska had suspended credit due to lack of communication. 2 of the best technicians had resigned, and the company's largest client, an agricultural cooperative from Kansas with a $1.4 million annual contract, had sent a formal letter requesting clarification on operational continuity. The Apex consultants knew what I had documented. They didn't know what I knew without needing to document. There are things that 18 years teaches you that no manual can transfer. The Suns contest lasted 18 days. Their attorney tried 3 arguments. First, that the clause had been inserted without the heir's full knowledge. Thomas responded with notary records showing complete copies had been delivered to Derek and Ryan at probate. Second, that the termination had been for strategic restructuring, which would constitute operational cause. Thomas responded with Missouri statute, which defines cause in specific terms, none of which includes replacement by external consultants. Third, that 18% of the shares represented a value Harold would not have intended to transfer given the company's growth. The Jackson County judge heard that third argument in a 40-minute hearing and said literally, "You're asking me to disregard a notarized document based on what the deceased would have intended? Motion denied." Thomas called me leaving the courthouse. I heard the street noise in the background and his voice with that specific restraint of someone smiling without wanting to show it. "Carol, it's yours." The first board meeting with my presence was on a Tuesday in August. Derek walked in without looking at me. Ryan walked in looking at his phone. The 2 Apex Operations Group representatives, who had been invited to present quarterly results, sat down with folders and laptops and that specific confidence of people who don't yet know the floor has shifted. I walked in last. I sat in the chair that had been left empty at the head of the table, Harold's chair, which nobody had occupied since the previous November. The senior Apex representative began talking about process integration and supply chain optimization. I let him talk for 4 minutes. Then I opened my folder. 12 pages. Data from the last 90 days. Byline with 2 unscheduled stoppages. Total cost of $340,000 in lost production. Nebraska contract suspended. $180,000 in blocked credit. 2 senior technicians resigned. Estimated replacement cost of $95,000 each. Letter from the Kansas Cooperative, the largest client, with language that in contracts of that type means we are considering leaving. I placed the 12 pages on the table. I own 18% of this company, I said, and as a shareholder, my first motion is for immediate termination of the contract with Apex Operations Group based on documented and measurable operational damage. Silence. Derek said, "You can't." "The company's bylaws," said Thomas Reeves, who was seated beside me, "allow any shareholder with more than 15% of shares to make motions at board meetings. Carol has 18. The motion is on the table. We need a vote." Ryan voted against. Derek voted against. I voted in favor. 2-1. Motion not approved. I already knew it would be that way. That wasn't the objective. The objective was for the Apex representatives to hear the number, 18%, and see the 12 pages, and understand that the person sitting in Harold's chair had not come to negotiate. She had come to stay. The Apex contract was terminated 4 months later, not by my motion, but because Derek and Ryan realized they were paying $48,000 a month to watch the company melt. They called me. Not Derek. Ryan, the one who had spent 11 minutes looking out the window the day of my termination. He called on a Sunday afternoon. "Carol, we need to talk." I said, "I know." I returned as operations director, renegotiated salary, $94,000, plus a new clause in my contract, drafted by Thomas Reeves, that specified exactly what constituted cause for any future termination, with language so precise that Derek read it 3 times and still signed. I recovered the Nebraska contract in 6 weeks. The Kansas Cooperative renewed for 3 more years in November. The beeline hasn't stopped once since I came back. In 2027, 2 years later, Derek and Ryan decided to sell the company to a private equity group from Chicago. Formal due diligence. Official valuation. Final offer, $11,800,000. Hold on to that number. 18% of $11,800,000 is $2,124,000. Thomas Reeves sent me an email on the day of closing. No text, just an image. The photo of Harold Whitfield that hung at the factory entrance. Blue suspenders, arms crossed, smiling at the camera. I printed it, framed it. It's on my living room wall today, next to the photo of my mother. Some people build things, others just inherit them. Harold knew the difference.
Carol didn't go back to that company to prove a point. She went back because she had built it, and because a man who wore blue suspenders every single day of his life had decided 15 years before she ever needed it that what she built was hers. The lesson isn't about legal clauses or shareholders' meetings. It's simpler than that. The people who show up every day, who know the name of every supplier and why the beeline jams in October, those people are the company, not the ones who inherit it. What do you think Harold's sons felt when they realized what was in that document? Drop it in the comments. I want to know. And now stay with me, because the next story is about a father with $340 in his account, a daughter with leukemia, and an insurance company that said no 11 times, and what he did with a notebook from the Dollar Tree that ended up in front of a state regulator. Don't go anywhere. The letter was 4 pages long, single-spaced, full of words like experimental protocol and insufficient clinical evidence and not medically necessary. Marcus Webb read it 3 times at the kitchen table while his 9-year-old daughter slept in the next room. Then he opened the Dollar Tree notebook he'd bought that morning, the last one on the shelf, green cover, 89 cents, and wrote the date at the top of the first page. He didn't know yet what he was building. He just knew he needed to start somewhere.
The denied claim.
My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 44 years old. I'm an HVAC technician, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've worked for myself for 11 years. I have a van, tools I paid for over a decade, and a client list I built call by call, referral by referral. My wife, Denise, works as an administrative assistant in a dental office. Together, we earn about $82,000 a year. We have a mortgage. We have 2 kids, Marcus Jr., 12, and Lily, 9. Health insurance comes through my employer of record, a general services company that contracts me as a subcontractor. I pay $340 a month for family coverage. It's the Pinnacle Health Partners Silver Plan. Exactly what I could afford without compromising the garage rental where I store my equipment. In January of this year, Lily started getting tired easily. Then she stopped eating. Then bruises appeared that didn't make sense. The pediatrician sent us straight to the specialist. The specialist sent us straight to the oncologist. The oncologist, Dr. Patricia Huang at Levine Children's Hospital in Charlotte, sat us down in a small room with 2 chairs and a tissue box on the table and said the words I already knew were coming, but that still arrived like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, stage 2. Treatable. With the right protocol. With the right protocol? I held on to that phrase like it was a rope. Dr. Huang recommended a combined immunotherapy protocol that had shown 83% remission rates in recent clinical studies for Lily's specific type of leukemia. Total treatment cost, $116,000. She submitted the coverage request to Pinnacle Health Partners that same day, January 23rd. On February 1st, we received the first letter, 4 pages, blue and white Pinnacle letterhead. The language was technical, distant, constructed to sound definitive. The recommended treatment had been classified as an experimental protocol, not approved for standard coverage. The request had been reviewed by our internal medical team and denied based on your plan's coverage criteria. At the bottom of page 4, in small print. You have the right to request an internal review within 30 days. Denise read the letter twice and went to cry in the bathroom with the door closed so Lily wouldn't hear. I called Pinnacle that night, waited 42 minutes. The attendant read from a script. I asked to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor read from the same script with a deeper voice. That night, I went to the Dollar Tree and bought a green spiral notebook for 89 cents. It was the last one on the shelf. I wrote the date at the top of the first page. Underneath, Denial Number 1, February 1st. I didn't know yet what I was doing. I just knew I needed to start keeping records. The internal appeal was submitted by Dr. Huang on February 4th. She included 37 pages of clinical literature, studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine, data from the Children's Oncology Group, comparative analyses of alternative protocols, and their inferior outcomes for Lily's specific type of leukemia. We waited the 15 business days Pinnacle required for appeal review. On February 26th, the second letter arrived. 3 pages this time. The language had changed slightly, more technical, more specific, as if someone had paid enough attention to build a more solid refusal. The treatment had been reclassified from experimental to not established as standard of care for the specific age group and clinical profile. At the bottom of page 3, you have the right to request a second internal review within 15 days. I wrote in the notebook, Denial Number 2, February 26th. New language, same answer. Lily had started an alternative protocol, less effective, but covered by the plan while we waited. Dr. Huang was honest with us. This protocol may work, but the odds are lower. Every week we wait for the ideal treatment matters. Every week matters. I wrote that in the notebook too. The second internal review was submitted on March 4th. While we waited, I researched. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm an HVAC technician who spent 11 years learning that when a system doesn't work, you don't accept the standard diagnosis. You trace the problem to its source. I found the North Carolina Department of Insurance website. Read the regulation on individual and family health plans. Read about the right to independent external review, outside Pinnacle, conducted by doctors with no ties to the insurer. Read about the formal complaint process to the State Insurance Commissioner. Read about FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and how citizens can request public data about insurance company practices registered with the state. I wrote everything in the notebook, pages 4, 5, and 6. On March 18th, the third letter arrived, 2 pages. The denial was now final after complete 2-level review. Pinnacle considered the case internally closed. If we wish to contest, we should seek external legal resources. I called at 11 at night. The recording said, "Your appeal has been reviewed and denied. For more information, visit our online portal." I put the phone on the table, looked at the notebook. 22 days, 3 denials, 7 appeals, $340 in the checking account. And then I wrote on page 7, in larger letters than all the others, "They did this to Lily. How many other children?" The question I wrote on page 7 wasn't rhetorical, it was a working hypothesis. I spent the following weekend doing what I knew how to do, tracing the system to its source. I submitted a FOIA request to the North Carolina Department of Insurance, requesting aggregated data on pediatric oncology coverage denials by Pinnacle Health Partners in the last 24 months, data that, by state law, are public records when they don't identify individual patients. The department responded in 11 business days, PDF file, 43 pages of raw data. I printed everything, spread it on the garage workbench where I normally do estimates. The numbers were there, in columns without names, only diagnosis codes and dates. I filtered by codes corresponding to acute lymphoblastic leukemia in patients under 12 years old. Filtered by the type of denied treatment, combined immunotherapy, the same protocol as Lily's, 67 denials. 18 months, language of denial letters, identical in all 67 instances, word for word. This was not a medical decision. It was a template. I wrote on page 8 of the notebook, 67 children, same letter, nobody reviewed anything. I needed help, not an elite attorney. I couldn't afford one. I needed someone who understood what the data meant and what to do with it. I researched support groups for families of children with leukemia in Charlotte, found one that met Tuesday evenings in the basement of a Baptist church in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood. I went the first Tuesday in April. 12 families. Children in treatment, in remission, some who hadn't made it. I asked directly, "Has anyone had treatment denied by Pinnacle Health Partners?" 5 hands went up. A woman named Brenda, daughter, 8 years old, similar diagnosis to Lily's, denial 4 months prior, said, "I got the same letter as you, word for word." A mother named Diane said, "I gave up after the second denial. My son has been on the alternative protocol for 3 months." A father named Jerome said only, "I needed someone who knew what to do with this." I showed them the notebook, showed them the FOIA data, showed them the 67 denials with identical language. Jerome looked at the pages for a long moment and said, "This is a pattern. This is evidence." He was a statistics professor at UNC Charlotte. Jerome Davis was 51 years old, thick-rimmed glasses, and had the specific patience of someone who spends their life explaining numbers to people who think they don't understand numbers. We met the following Saturday at my garage workbench, the same one where I do estimates, surrounded by technical manuals and boxes of spare parts. Jerome brought a laptop. I brought the printed FOIA file and the green notebook. In 2 hours, Jerome had built a spreadsheet that turned 43 pages of raw data into something anyone could read. 67 denials of combined immunotherapy for pediatric acute lymphoblastic leukemia, all between January 2024 and June 2025, all with the same denial language. Average time between request and denial, 4.3 days. 4.3 days, Jerome said, without taking his eyes off the screen. A human oncologist would take at minimum 2 weeks to properly review 37 pages of clinical literature. They're denying in 4 days. What does that mean? Jerome turned the laptop toward me. It means no doctor read Lily's case. No doctor read any of these 67 cases. This is automated. I wrote on page 9 of the notebook, no doctor, 4 days, automated. We spent 3 weeks finding the other families. Jerome created a simple online form. No insurance company name, just pediatric oncology treatment denied in North Carolina. We shared it in Facebook support groups for families of children with cancer in Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, and Durham. In 18 days, 14 families had responded, all with Pinnacle Health Partners plans, all with combined immunotherapy denials, 12 with denial language identical to the 67 in the FOIA file. 2 of those families had children who had started the alternative protocol, less effective, because they couldn't afford the ideal treatment out of pocket. One of the children had relapsed. We gathered all 14 families on a Saturday afternoon in the same Baptist church basement in Plaza Midwood. We brought the documents. Jerome presented the spreadsheet. I presented the notebook, now 22 pages full. A woman named Patricia, from Raleigh, said something that stayed in the room after she finished speaking. They knew they were doing this to all our children, and they approved it anyway. Nobody answered because there was no answer. There was only the weight of it. After a moment I said, "Then we need someone who knows how to take this somewhere they can't ignore it." Sarah Okonkwo's name came up twice in different searches I did about health coverage and regulatory investigations in North Carolina. She was an investigative journalist at the Charlotte Observer for 9 years. 2 award-winning stories about the state hospital system, one on abusive billing in emergency rooms, another on aggressive collection practices against low-income families. Exactly the kind of reporter who understands data and knows what to do with it. I sent her an email on a Monday night. No drama, just the facts. Who I was, Lily's diagnosis, the 3 denials, the FOIA file, the 67 instances, the 14 families, Jerome's spreadsheet. She responded in 40 minutes. "Can you meet me tomorrow at 10 at the Observer office?" I went with Jerome and the notebook. Sarah Okonkwo was 38, short hair, and looked at documents the way oncologists look at scans, searching for what isn't visible on the surface. She spent 40 minutes in silence with Jerome's spreadsheet and the FOIA file before saying anything. Then she said, "I need to verify one thing before we continue. Do you know the name of the software Pinnacle uses for claims review?" I didn't know. Jerome didn't know. "Leave it with me," Sarah said. Sarah took 8 days. During those 8 days, Lily completed her second cycle of the alternative protocol. Dr. Huang called us in for a conversation. The markers were responding, but more slowly than she wanted. She said the words carefully, but the care didn't hide what was underneath. Every week we wait for the ideal protocol has a cost. I went home and wrote on page 17 of the notebook, 55 days since the first denial. Sarah called on a Thursday morning while I was replacing a compressor in an office in uptown Charlotte. I answered with grease on my hands. "Marcus, I found what I was looking for." The software was called CoverLogic Pro, an automated claims review platform used by regional insurers in 11 states. Pinnacle had acquired the system in October 2023. Sarah had obtained, through an internal source, the configuration manual for the system Pinnacle had implemented. The system had a parameter called Auto Approval Threshold by Category. For pediatric oncology treatments above $40,000, the threshold had been configured as 0, meaning no request in that category was automatically approved. All went to the human review queue. but the human review queue had been reduced in July 2024 from 5 reviewing physicians to 1. A single part-time doctor named Dr. Sandra Mills, responsible for reviewing all complex denials across all Pinnacle plans in North Carolina. 1 doctor, part-time, 67 children. Sarah said, "This violates Article 5850-61 of the North Carolina insurance law, which requires individualized medical review for oncology treatment denials. This is not a matter of interpretation. It is a direct violation." I wrote on page 18, "1 doctor, part-time, law violated." The formal complaint to the North Carolina Insurance Commissioner was submitted on April 22nd. It was not just Marcus Webb complaining. It was a 48-page document prepared with the help of Sarah Okonkwo, Jerome Davis, and a public interest attorney from Raleigh named Christine Adler, who had read the preliminary story Sarah had published online that afternoon and offered her help pro bono within hours. The document included the FOIA data with Jerome's statistical analysis, the denial letters from all 14 families with comparative linguistic analysis showing identical text, the CoverLogic Pro configuration manual with the zeroed threshold, employment records showing the reduction in the medical review team, and statements from all 14 families, including Marcus's, which attached photocopies of all 22 pages of the Green Notebook. The insurance commissioner opened a formal investigation in 48 hours. That same day, Sarah published the full story in the Charlotte Observer, title, "1 doctor, half-time, 67 children." In 6 hours, the story had been shared 42,000 times. The Associated Press picked it up the next day. Pinnacle Health Partners made no immediate comment. I wrote on the last line of page 22 of the notebook, "The last space left, 67 days. They're going to have to answer now." I received a phone call from Pinnacle Health Partners on April 25th, 3 days after Sarah's story was published. It was not the automated recording. It was not a scripted attendant. It was Pinnacle's Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, a man named Robert Fitch, who called my cell phone at 8:45 in the morning while I was having coffee before heading out to work. He said Pinnacle had conducted an emergency internal review of Lily's case and other recently identified similar cases. He said Lily's treatment had been reclassified for immediate approval. He said Pinnacle was committed to resolving any discrepancies in review processes. Every word chosen with the care of someone with attorneys on the side dictating what could be said. I listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, I asked only one question. "Have the other 13 children been approved as well?" 2 seconds of silence. "We are in the process of reviewing all identified cases." "That's not an answer," I said. Another silence. Then, "Yes?" "All identified families will receive coverage approval within the next 48 hours. I put the phone on the table, walked to Lily's room. She was awake with her tablet, watching a cooking video she loves. She looked at me and said, "Hi, Dad." I sat on the edge of the bed and didn't say anything for a moment. She asked, "Everything okay?" I said, "Yeah, everything's okay." The formal regulatory hearing was scheduled for May 18th at the North Carolina Department of Insurance building in Raleigh. Christine Adler prepared me for 3 days, not to dramatize, to be precise. "You don't need to convince anyone you're a victim," she said. "The data already did that. You need to show up, look at them, and tell the truth clearly. That's all." On the morning of the 18th, I woke up at 5. Denise was awake too. She had never slept. Lily slept in her room with the first cycle of the correct protocol already started 11 days earlier, since Pinnacle's emergency approval. I took out the suit I had worn at Denise's and my wedding 12 years ago. It still fit. I took the Green Notebook. We drove 2.5 hours to Raleigh. Jerome went in his own car. Sarah Okonkwo went as a journalist, not as an ally, because she had professional ethics to uphold, but she was there. The other families came too, 11 of the 14, some with children, some without, because the children were in treatment and couldn't travel. The Department of Insurance building was beige, functional, no architectural drama. The hearing room had plastic chairs and a long table at the front where the 5 members of the regulatory panel sat. I sat in the front row with Christine and Jerome. The green notebook was in my hand. Pinnacle Health Partners CEO, a man named Harold Howe, sat at the witness table with 3 attorneys beside him and a thick folder in front of him. He spoke for 20 minutes, precise corporate language. Processes under review. Commitment to continuous improvement. Isolated cases identified and corrected. The attorneys had turned 67 children into isolated cases with the efficiency of people who do this professionally. Then Christine Adler stood up and submitted to the panel Jerome's spreadsheet, the FOIA file, the CoverLogic Pro configuration manual with the zeroed threshold, and the employment records showing the reduction of the medical team. The panel chairman looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked at Harold Howe and asked, "Are you stating that 67 denials of pediatric oncology treatment above $40,000 were each individually reviewed by a qualified physician as required by State Article 58-5061? Harold Howe looked at the attorneys. One of them whispered something. Howe looked back at the panel. "We are in the process of reviewing that specific procedure." The panel chairman made a note, said nothing more at that moment. He didn't need to. I was called to testify at 2:20 in the afternoon. Christine had told me, be precise. So I was precise. I described Lily's diagnosis. The first denial on February 1st, the second on February 26th, the third on March 18th, the 42 minutes on hold, the recording at 11 at night, the $340 in the account. Then I placed the green notebook on the table in front of me. "I bought this notebook at the Dollar Tree for 89 cents, I said. "It's where I recorded every denial, every appeal, every phone call, 22 pages, 67 days between the first denial and the emergency approval." I opened it to the last page, read what I had written that March morning, alone in the kitchen after the automated recording. "They did this to Lily. How many other children?" I closed the notebook. The answer was 67, and I needed you to know that each one of those 67 children had a father or a mother who was also awake at 11 at night, listening to a recording say their appeal had been denied. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then the panel chairman said, "Thank you, Mr. Webb." And I knew from the way he said it, not as a formula but as something real, that the green notebook had done what it needed to do. The regulatory decision was published on June 12th. Pinnacle Health Partners was fined $8,700,000 for systematic violation of Article 58-5061, inadequate medical review and 67 documented denials of pediatric oncology treatment. The insurer was required to hire independent medical review staff for all oncology cases, with semi-annual audits by the Department of Insurance for a period of 3 years. All 67 families received full retroactive coverage, including reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses incurred during the denial period. Diane Holt, the denials manager whose name I had found in the internal documents and whose signature appeared on 41 of the 67 letters, was separated from Pinnacle in July. The internal communication, which leaked to Sarah Okonkwo, said team restructuring. Her LinkedIn went without an update for 4 months. Harold Howe testified before the North Carolina Legislative Assembly's Health Committee in August. The session was live-streamed, 3 hours and 40 minutes. He used the phrase isolated cases 11 times. The legislators stopped taking notes after the 3rd time. The confidential settlement between the 14 families and Pinnacle was finalized in September. Christine Adler told me she couldn't disclose the amount due to a confidentiality clause. What I can say is that the mortgage got lighter, and the van has a new compressor that I had been putting off for 2 years, Lily completed her 4th cycle of the correct protocol in October. Dr. Huang called us in for a consultation on a Monday morning. We sat in the same chairs, in the same small room with the tissue box on the table. She had the results in a folder in front of her. She said, "The markers are where I want them to be." Denise held my hand. Lily was outside in the waiting room with Marcus Jr., and I could hear her laughing at something he had said. That sound, Lily laughing outside a pediatric oncology waiting room, is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my life. Dr. Huang kept talking about monitoring protocols and follow-up appointments, and I heard all of it. But what stayed with me was that laugh from outside. I wrote on the last line of the last page of the notebook. There was no space left. She's going to be okay. Sarah Okonkwo called me in November to tell me that her story, One Doctor, Halftime, 67 Children, had been named a finalist for the Investigative Journalism Award from the Society of Professional Journalists of North Carolina. She won. I congratulated her. She said, "The award is as much yours as mine. You built the case." I said no. She had found CoverLogic Pro, had verified the manual, had published when it mattered. Without her, the data would have stayed in a spreadsheet on my garage workbench. She said, "Without you, there was no data." We were silent for a second, the kind of silence that happens when two people realize they're describing the same thing from different angles, and both are right. The green notebook sits on a shelf in my home office now, next to the photo from Denise's and my wedding, and a photo of Lily taken the day she lost her first tooth, at 6 years old, smiling with that gap in the middle. 89 cents, 22 pages. A child who is going to be okay. Sometimes what changes everything costs almost nothing. It just requires you to start writing.
Marcus Webb didn't have connections, didn't have money, didn't have a law degree. He had a green notebook, a statistics professor he'd met in a church basement, and 67 data points that proved what he already knew. His daughter wasn't a special case. She was one of a system, and systems can be changed when someone refuses to stop writing. The lesson here is simple and it's uncomfortable. The insurance company was counting on him to give up after the second letter, after the third, after the 11 p.m. recording. They were counting on exhaustion. He gave them documentation instead. What would you have done in his place? Let me know in the comments. And now, stay for one more, because our last story tonight is about a woman who wrote 847 drafts alone at 2 in the morning and watched someone else take credit for every single word, and the one timestamp that gave her everything back. Don't go anywhere. She wrote 847 drafts. She wrote them at 2 in the morning when her daughter was asleep and her freelance invoices were overdue. She wrote the opening line that made the book a bestseller. She wrote the paragraph about his father that made people cry on airplanes. She wrote every single word. And when the book sold 240,000 copies and the author sat on national television talking about his writing process as a personal journey, she recognized the exact phrase she had written on a Tuesday night, alone with a cup of cold coffee. That was the moment she stopped being invisible.
The Ghost Byline.
My name is Nina Okafor. I'm 38 years old and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a 2-bedroom apartment I share with my daughter Amara, 7 years old, and stacks of manuscripts that never had my name on the cover. My father came from Nigeria in 1987 with an engineering degree and $40. He worked construction for the first 3 years because his degree wasn't recognized here. Then he passed an equivalency exam, got a job at a firm in Detroit, and sent money to my mother and me in Lagos until he could bring us over. I was 4 years old when I arrived in the United States. I grew up hearing my father say 2 things repeatedly. Honest work doesn't shame you, and your name is your reputation. I spent 15 years trying to put my name on something that mattered. I was a journalist for 3 years, freelance, No contract, no health insurance. I wrote for magazines that paid 25 cents a word and thought they were being generous. Then I discovered ghostwriting, writing books, articles, and memoirs for other people under their names for a flat fee. No credit, no royalties, but real, predictable payment. It was a deal I had made with myself. I write for others to pay the bills now. One day I write for myself. The problem is that one day is very easy to postpone when the bills keep coming. Brett Callahan found me through a referral from a previous client of mine, a productivity coach for whom I had written a book that sold well enough for her to appear in the Forbes Coaches Council. Brett had 840,000 Instagram followers. He sold online mindset transformation courses for $799 each. He had a podcast with 340 episodes and an email list of 270,000 people. What Brett didn't have was a book. He called me on a Thursday in October. Confident voice, warm, the kind you recognize immediately as trained. Not natural, but well-trained. He said he wanted to write a transformational memoir, that he had a powerful story to tell, that he had been recommended to speak with me because I understood how to turn experience into narrative. We met on video the following week. He talked for 50 minutes about his difficult childhood, his bankruptcy at 32, his rebuilding. It was real material, not extraordinary, but real. There was something genuine underneath the layers of coach language he had built over everything. I said I could write that book. He said, I knew you were the right person. The agreed fee was $18,000, $6,000 at signing, $6,000 on manuscript delivery, $6,000 at publication, plus a mention in the acknowledgments that Brett described as appropriate recognition of editorial support. I should have asked for more. I should have asked for real credit. But $18,000 was the equivalent of 4 months of guaranteed income, and Amara needed braces, and I had an overdue heating bill. So I said yes. I worked on Brett Callahan's book for 7 months. It's not an exaggeration to say that book was the best work I had ever done. There was something in his material, the real bankruptcy, the real humiliation, the father who never said he was proud, that I was able to transform into something that went beyond the coach vocabulary Brett used to describe his own life. I conducted 11 hours of video interviews, transcribed everything, identified the moments where Brett's voice broke slightly, not dramatically, slightly, and built the chapters around those moments. I wrote the book's opening line at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, with Amara asleep in the next room and a cup of coffee that had gone cold without me noticing. The line was, the day I went bankrupt was the first day I was ever completely honest with myself. Brett responded by email 20 minutes later, even though it was the middle of the night. This is exactly it. I saved every version in Google Docs, not as a precaution out of method. I'm organized by nature, and Google Docs automatically saved every change with a timestamp. By the end of the project, there were 847 versions recorded, from the initial outline to the final manuscript delivered to the publisher. I delivered the manuscript in May. Brett transferred the $6,000 for delivery within 48 hours and sent a message I kept. Nina, this is extraordinary. You gave me a book I couldn't have written alone. Hold on to that message. It comes back later. The contract. I need to talk about the contract because this is where everything starts to unravel and where everything much later starts to rebuild. Brett sent me a standard work-for-hire agreement, a format that transfers all copyright to the contracting party and removes any future claim by the writer over the work. It's the standard ghostwriting contract. I had signed versions of it before, but this time, before signing, I read more carefully. There was a clause that bothered me, specifically the language about future royalties in the event of sales above 100,000 copies, which I found vague. I sent Brett an email asking for clarification on that specific clause. Brett responded, "I'll have my attorney review it and send you the updated version." The updated version never arrived. I sent a follow-up email in August. Brett responded, "Sorry, crazy busy here with the launch. I'll sort it out." The book was published in September. I assumed the contract would be resolved after the launch. I assumed the acknowledgement mention would be there. I assumed Brett Callahan, who had sent me enthusiastic messages for 7 months, would honor the verbal agreement he had made. I assumed a lot of things. The book was called Honest Ground. Subtitle, How Losing Everything Taught Me to Build What Matters. Minimalist cover, elegant typography. Brett's photo on the back flap, calibrated smile, gaze toward the horizon, faded blue shirt that probably cost $200 but communicated, "I'm approachable." Acknowledgements. To my incredible team, my podcast community, and the many voices that supported this journey, and to my assistant team, whose support made this book possible. My assistant team. I read that line in the pre-publication PDF Brett sent me, not as a courtesy, but because I had asked to review last-minute typos. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and went to wash the dishes because sometimes you need to do something physical and mundane while you process what you just read. My name did not exist in that book. 7 months, 11 hours of interviews, 847 versions. The opening line that Brett had called exactly it at 2 in the morning. My assistant team. I received the final $6,000 in October, 1 week after publication, with no message beyond the bank transfer notification. I deposited the money, paid the heating bill, bought Amara's braces, and I went quiet for 3 months. The kind of quiet that isn't acceptance. It's accumulation. The Today Show was in January. Brett Callahan sitting in a champagne-colored armchair next to the host. Blue shirt, another one, same style. Honest Ground had sold 180,000 copies in 4 months. The host said the book had touched something universal in people. Brett smiled with the calibrated modesty of someone who practices calibrated modesty. The host asked, "What was the writing process like for you?" And Brett said, "I was watching on my phone while waiting for Amara to come out of school, sitting in the car with the heater on because it was January in Minneapolis. Writing this book was the most therapeutic process of my life. Each chapter was like sitting with my own story and finally having an honest conversation with it." The host said, "There's a line at the beginning of the book that so many people have quoted. The day I went bankrupt was the first day I was ever completely honest with myself. How did that line come to you?" Brett paused. 2 seconds. The kind of pause that suggests deep reflection. "That line came to me at 2 in the morning," he said, "alone with my thoughts. It's the kind of clarity that only comes in silence. I heard that sitting in the car, with the heater blowing in my face. Alone. At 2 in the morning. I called my attorney, a college friend who had set up her own practice in Minneapolis, that same afternoon. Her name was Rachel Kim. 36 years old, small office in the northeast Minneapolis neighborhood, specialty in contract law and intellectual property. We had been friends since college. Not close, but the kind that keep track of each other out of mutual respect. We met on a Wednesday afternoon. I brought everything, the emails, the messages, the transfer receipts, and the Google Docs link with the 847 drafts. Rachel listened to everything without interrupting. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Do you have the signed contract?" I said, "He never sent me the revised version. I kept following up and he kept saying he'd sort it out." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her laptop. "Give me access to the Google Docs." We spent 2 hours reviewing the version history. Rachel is not a writer, but she is methodical the way good lawyers are methodical. She was looking for patterns, not narrative. She found what she needed in version number 3, A comment from Brett in the margin of the second paragraph, written on November 16th of the previous year, that said, "Perfect, exactly what I wanted to say." Then she opened the email Brett had sent me after the manuscript delivery. Read it out loud. "Nina, this is extraordinary. You gave me a book I couldn't have written alone." She closed the laptop. "Nina, he never signed the work for hire agreement. Without a signed contract, American copyright law is clear. Authorship belongs to whoever created the work. You have 847 versions with timestamps showing you created every line of that book. You have emails from him explicitly acknowledging your authorship, and you have the fact that he published without a signed contract." She paused. "You are not his assistant. You are his co-author, and he knows it." Rachel contacted Brett's attorney on a Monday in February. A formal notification, precise language, requesting acknowledgement of co-authorship and negotiation of retroactive royalties. The response arrived in 4 days. Condescending tone, corporate language. Brett's attorney argued that the relationship had been clearly a ghostwriting arrangement, and that the absence of a signed contract was a pending administrative formality, not a change in the nature of the agreement. Rachel called me after reading the response. I heard her tone before I heard her words. That specific attorney tone of someone who has found something the other side didn't realize they had left exposed. He just confirmed in writing that there was a verbal agreement, which means there is a contract. It's just not on paper. And without the signed work-for-hire agreement, the verbal arrangement does not transfer copyright under American law. I'm preparing the filing. I filed the co-authorship action in federal court for the District of Minnesota on February 28th. That night, Amara found me at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of me. She was 7 years old and had that specific ability children have of asking the most direct things at the most unexpected moments. "Mom, are you fighting with someone?" I thought for a second. "I'm taking back something that's mine," I said. She considered that with the seriousness of a 7-year-old. "Okay," she said, and went to get her juice. Discovery revealed what Rachel had suspected but couldn't prove before. Brett Callahan had a pattern. Records requested during the process showed 2 previous books published under Brett's name, one in 2019, one in 2021. Both ghostwritten, both with work-for-hire contracts that, according to Brett's attorney's internal records, had been sent for signature, but whose signed originals had never been filed. Rachel located the 2 previous ghostwriters in 2 weeks. A woman named Diane Torres from Austin, Texas. A man named Paul Weston from Portland, Oregon. Diane had tried to negotiate credit after Brett's second book. It sold 40,000 copies, and had backed down after Brett's attorney threatened her with a breach of confidentiality action, using a clause from a contract she had partially signed before noticing the problem. Paul had simply moved on. "I didn't have the energy to fight," he told me by phone. "But if you're fighting, I'll show up." Both provided statements. 3 books, 3 ghostwriters, 3 work-for-hire contracts never formalized. Rachel argued to the court that the pattern demonstrated not administrative negligence, but deliberate practice. Brett Callahan systematically published ghost-written books without formalizing contracts, creating intentional ambiguity that protected his authorship claim, while eliminating any legal obligation to the actual writers. The judge read the argument and scheduled a hearing for April. The publisher was called Meridian Press, a mid-size independent house in New York that had published all 3 of Brett's books and was at that moment in negotiations with him for a 4th title. They learned about the action when Rachel formally notified them as part of the discovery process. Their response was different from Brett's. Meridian's editor-in-chief, a man named David Park, who had been in the publishing industry for 23 years, called Rachel within 2 days. He said Meridian had not been informed of the nature of the relationship between Brett and his writers, that if the alleged facts were true, The publisher had published works with misrepresented authorship, that this created legal and reputational exposure for Meridian that they were not willing to assume. He asked if there was a path to resolution that didn't involve the publisher in prolonged litigation. Rachel said there was. David Park asked to meet with me directly. We met on video on a Tuesday in March. He had the book in his hand, the physical copy, blue cover, elegant typography, Brett Callahan's name in relief. He placed it on the table in front of him with the care of someone setting down something they had begun to see differently. "Miss Okafor," he said, "can I ask, what is the first line of chapter 4? I answered without hesitating, word for word, because I had written that line. He noted something down, then said, "Chapter 7? The paragraph about his father in the hospital?" I recited the paragraph from memory. He closed his notebook. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about what Meridian can do to resolve this correctly." The agreement was reached in June, outside of court. Brett Callahan did not publicly admit co-authorship. His attorneys negotiated that until the end, but the agreement included the following. Starting with the 4th edition of Honest Ground, the cover and title page would include Nina Okafor as co-author. Retroactive royalties, calculated on the 240,000 copies sold to that date, based on co-authorship percentage, came to $342,000, paid by Meridian Press in direct settlement. Brett's corporate speaking contract, which had been his largest revenue channel, was cancelled by his representation agency following the publisher's weekly story about the case. The story didn't cite the confidential agreement, but described the pattern of the 3 unformalized contracts with language clear enough for any corporate HR director to draw their own conclusions. Meridian Press offered Nina a 2-book contract, her own books under her own name, with a $75,000 advance for the first title. David Park said on the call where he presented the offer, "We lost an author, but we found a real writer, and real writers are harder to find." Amara was outside playing when the call ended. I walked into the backyard and stood watching her for a moment. That 7-year-old who had grown up hearing the sound of a keyboard at 2 in the morning, who had learned that honest work doesn't shame you and that your name is your reputation. 2 things my father had said. 2 things I had temporarily forgotten when I accepted $18,000 to be invisible. There was no longer any Google Docs version called Callahan Manuscript Final Bis 847. There was a new document, blank file. Title, by Nina Okafor. I opened it, wrote the first line of my first book, and this time, it was completely mine.
Nina didn't win because she had the best lawyer. She won because she had saved every single draft, every timestamp, every version. The lesson isn't about ghostwriting or publishing contracts. It's about documentation and about understanding that your work has a signature even when your name isn't on it. 847 versions of the truth. You can try to erase a name, you cannot erase evidence. Now, before you go, we had 3 stories tonight. A woman who spent 18 years building something and discovered the founder had protected her before she ever needed protection. A father with a green notebook and 67 data points who refused to let exhaustion win. And a writer who saved every draft at 2 in the morning without knowing she was building her own case. 3 different people, 3 different fights, one thing in common. They all kept the receipts. Whatever you're building right now, document it. Save every version. Keep every email. Write it down. Because the day you need it, you will be very glad you did. If any of these stories hit you, hit that like button and leave a comment. Tell me which one stayed with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear one of these tonight, share it. They'll thank you. Next time, we have the story of a man who gave 31 years to a company and was walked out by security on a Tuesday morning. What they didn't know was what was still on the laptop they handed back to him. That story is next. Don't miss it.